Thanks very much, Michael. So the title of the talk is Animal Information Systems that Raise Beef Farm Profitability by Improving Herd and Animal Health. But I suppose the underlying message that hopefully I'll get over to you over the course of the next 20 minutes is really one of convergence in the fields of science, genetic science and veterinary science, and also the effective use of limited resources in two lightly resourced organisations, which are Animal Health Ireland and ICBF. So hopefully through the talk you keep those messages in mind, and I'll come back to them at the end of this presentation. And apologies again to those of you who might have been present in the dairy conference yesterday, but there is a certain degree of repetition. That's because this issue of BVD is absolutely common to both dairy and beef herds. So the outline of my talk is some words of background in relation to Animal Health Ireland. This will be fresher to those of you that are not from Ireland than those of you from here, but Animal Health Ireland is a relatively recent organisation, and I'm sure that there's something in this for everybody. Two slides then in relation to animal health and profitability. I think it's important that we keep looking at the costs and benefits of eradication programs, and that we have that up front and centre before we embark on eradication programs, which in the past perhaps wasn't always the case. Then the meat of the discussion is in relation to the harnessing of the ICBF database, the use to which Animal Health Ireland has put the ICBF database, and the development work that has gone on between AHI and ICBF over the last year and a half, 2 years. And then finally a couple of slides on reflections, coming back to those couple of themes that I mentioned at the start. So the background to Animal Health Ireland was officially launched in January 2009 by the then Minister Brendan Smith, and was incorporated as a company limited by guarantee in May of 2009. So we're now at our 3-year anniversary. It's a not-for-profit organisation. The budget currently is approximately €1 million per annum. It's a public-private partnership, so 50% of our funding is provided by the Department of Agriculture and the other 50% by private sector sources. It's important to point out that the funding from the department is absolutely contingent on receipt of funding from private sector sources. So if we take in no money from private sector, we get no money from government. So there's a real commercial imperative to show that we are actually delivering on behalf of the industry, and I think that's a very good thing. The organisation consists of 7 directors, which were nominated by the Minister on the creation of the company, 6 staff, including myself, and then there are 32 member organisations that provide the funding. That's probably not going to be possible to see the individual organisations there on that chart, but it is important maybe to look at the inner wheel on that diagram, which shows the sectors from which those organisations are drawn. So they represent the farming organisations, the farming unions, the breed societies, and so on, the dairy and beef processors, which provide the majority of our funding, government and state agencies, and I've already mentioned the important role of the department, but also in that mix is Teagasc, and you'll be very familiar with the work of Teagasc, and Board Bia, which is the agency in charge with the marketing of meat and food products. And then the professional advisory and support services, which include the likes of Veterinary Ireland, UCD, the University College Dublin, and ICBF, which is, I suppose, the subject of the talk today. The remit of the organisation was to pursue effective control strategies for the important non-regulated diseases of livestock. So we're certainly excluded from, nor do we want any involvement with TB, brucellosis and BSE. I think the department has taken on those challenges, and thankfully in relation to brucellosis we have achieved eradication. BSE is on its last legs, and hopefully the signs in relation to TB have been encouraging over the last year or so. The mission of the organisation has been narrowed in the recent strategy which we've just published. This is on foot of a period of reflection with our stakeholders, and you can see here that we're narrowing the scope down to specifically cattle farming, whereas our remit is livestock. We're saying with the resources that we have at our disposal that we're only equipped really to look at cattle diseases at this moment in time for the next 3 years. Okay, the human resources, I mentioned what they are, but to see them displayed in an organogram is perhaps useful as well. Over on the left-hand side there, we have the member organisations and the board of directors. And the board of directors obviously in charge with the governance of the organisation. the day-to-day operation and delivery on business plans is my responsibility and that of my team. And then in the green bars there, you can see the various technical working groups, which really are the engine room behind all of our programs. These are technical experts who come together to develop the science that allows us to roll out the various programs. And they give their time free of charge to Animal Health Ireland. They work pro bono. And without that extraordinary degree of commitment and generosity, we wouldn't be in a position with the budgets that we have to deliver the programs that we do. And so there may be members of the technical working groups at this conference, and it's certainly worth acknowledging time and time again the generosity of that support to Animal Health Ireland. Then on the extreme right, for the two programs for which we have developed national scale rollout, those are the programs for BVD and Cell Check, which is a somatic cell count reduction program. We have implementation groups. And that is really where the science of the technical working groups meets the politics and the practice of industry. So you can see there on the left-hand side of this particular diagram, the research and the investigation that's carried out by the technical working groups must interface with the reality of implementing a program in practice. So it can be quite a laborious process to get to, you can see in the center of that diagram there, an agreed national position. And we have worked through that on BVD. We're working through that currently in relation to Johne's disease. But it is worth working that process because hopefully at the end of that you have a national consensus position in terms of where the industry needs to take these particular issues. And then the agreement on the plan of action and then the implementation of that plan of action, as I say, fall back on my shoulders and that of the implementation group. So when we were created as an organization in 2009, we really had no clear ideas in terms of what the priorities are in relation to the non-regulated diseases of livestock. And we were looking particularly at cattle diseases back then. So what we did to try and resolve those doubts was that we carried out a Delphi study, which is like an extended conversation. It took place over 3 rounds with 85 industry experts. And we, in parallel with that, carried out 2 extensive farmer surveys, one with dairy farmers and one with beef farmers, which were delivered through the ICBF Herd Plus system. So from that then we began to develop an understanding of what the issues that needed to be addressed in the area of non-regulated animal health were, and we began to put in place programs to deal with those issues. And you can see that BVD and other health milk quality, which is a proxy for somatic cell count, or vice versa, are both up there high on the list. So in the strategic document which I referred to earlier, we set out our priorities for the period 2012 to 14, and these are the 4 programs that we will dedicate the vast majority of our resources to dealing with over the next 3 years. Those are BVD, somatic cell count reduction, Johne's disease, and IBR. And for each of those we have produced a business plan which is published on our website, and we account to our stakeholders on a quarterly basis in relation to the delivery against those business plans. Okay, the second part then is in relation to the relationship between animal health and profitability. And I mentioned that not always in the past has the cost-benefit analysis been carried out before the eradication program or the control program has begun. So we've sought to address that in the case of BVD and Cell Check by doing some serious economic analysis of both issues. In relation to BVD eradication, we didn't have the resources to carry out this study ourselves, but we commissioned it. And we commissioned it from an organisation called the Scottish Agricultural Colleges, which has a long track record in terms of economic analysis particularly of BVD, but also other major production diseases and other animal diseases generally. And the figures that emanated from that study are quite startling and quite significant. It showed that the total losses to the industry from BVD, and BVD is a very highly prevalent disease in the Irish cattle population, total losses are €102 million per annum. The cost of eradication is estimated at €10 million per annum. So therefore the benefit to cost ratio is 10 to 1 overall. It's slightly more favourable for the dairy industry than it is for beef, but the argument for addressing it is compelling in either case. And the payback period overall then is just over 6 months. So I think any of you who are involved in business, and all of you as farmers are businessmen and businesswomen, if you're offered a return of €10 for every euro invested, I think it's an opportunity that all of us would jump at. And that's the promise that the BVD eradication program holds out, essentially. In relation to somatic cell counts, this is research which was carried out by Chagask in Moore Park, and particularly by Lawrence Chalou, Una Geary, and by Thea Hennessy. And what it was looking at was the inverse relationship between somatic cell counts and the profitability, net farm profitability on a dairy farm. And the figures here are produced for a typical dairy farm of 94 cows. And I appreciate this isn't of particular relevance to a beef audience, but I think the principle is that we should be looking at the economics of intervention before we actually intervene. And here you can see that there is a marked difference in profitability as you tackle somatic cells. Okay, the real substance of this talk is in relation to how Animal Health Ireland has interacted with ICBF on the BVD program, and how we've developed how we've expanded the existing Herd Plus program of ICBF to suit the purposes of BVD eradication in this country. First of all, some words about how the program is intended to operate and how it is actually operating currently on a voluntary basis. So it's currently in phase 1, which is a voluntary program which will run up to the end of this year. And we're at this moment sitting down with the Department of Agriculture to draft legislation that would allow us to take this program to a compulsory phase from the 1st of January next year. And you can see that in the top right there, the photograph of the tissue tag. It's a button type tag. We had initially hoped, and we were hopeful up until September last year, that we would be delivering this program using a modified official ID tag. Now, unfortunately, for reasons that are probably too lengthy to go into at this moment in time, the tender process for the official ID tag was unsuccessful. In other words, no manufacturer came through that tender process with a tag that was tissue-enabled to the satisfaction of the Department of Agriculture. So we were faced with a decision in September last year whether to abort the program for this year or to proceed using a button tag. So we took the latter decision. We have proceeded using a button tag. But we are confident that the tender process, which is almost on the point of being launched again by the department, this time will result in a tissue-enabled official ID tag, which will have a double benefit. It will reduce the costs marginally for those farmers participating, but also it will simplify the logistics of putting in the tag. So instead of having 3 tags, the animals will have 2 tags, 2 official ID tags, one of which is tissue sample enabled. But from there on, the flow is much as you see it on the diagram. The farmer inserts the tissue tag. The ear punch delivers a tissue sample, which is submitted to a lab, and we've gone through a process of designating the labs. So from 1st of July onwards, the only samples results that we will accept into the program will be from designated labs, which are also ISO 17025 accredited. So there has been a huge move forward in terms of upward standardization of the testing that's carried out in support of this program. Those results then from the labs are fed into the ICBF database, and from there relayed back to the farmers and to those advisors that are authorised to look at the farmers' results, and they're also relayed to the marts. So farmers going to the marts now to purchase cattle, at least in the majority of the ICOS marts, and hopefully with all marts by the end of the year, will be able to see the BVD test status of the cattle being presented for sale. And there is also a facility within the programme for generation of a declaration which allows for farm-to-farm sales to proceed. That's what will happen for the first 3 years of the programme. It's based around intensive tag testing. For the following 3 years of the programme, it moves to a less intensive phase whereby the programme is delivered through monitoring. For dairy farms, that involves bulk tank testing. For beef farms, that will be based on serological screening, targeted screening of limited numbers of young stock primarily. And just to give you some of the figures in terms of the voluntary phase of the programme, bear in mind that there are about 2 million calf registrations in Ireland per annum. So currently, as of last week, we had 563,000 tags ordered, tissue-enabled tags ordered, 9,500 herds participating. The split between dairy and beef was 57 to 43. and 373,000 samples had been tested. 369,000 of those samples were negative for BVD, and positive 2,236, which gives you an animal level prevalence of 0.6%. Now, in our cost-benefit analysis, we were modelling a prevalence of 0.75%. So the actual prevalence is lying somewhat below the model prevalence. That may be a feature of the fact that the volunteer farmers have been farmers that tend to have been controlling BVD over the last number of years. So we might expect that there would be a slight increase in prevalence as we move to a compulsory programme. On the other hand, we have taken out, or we will have taken out by the end of the year, almost 3,000 PIs. And if we continue that through to the compulsory phase of the programme, we would expect in a normal year that there would be up to 15,000 PIs in the system. So this is all about a very short, sharp programme aimed at taking out the maximum number of PIs in the minimum amount of time. The herd level prevalence is currently about 13-14%, and we would expect that that will tick up to about 25%. So we expect that 1 in 4 herds will have 1 or more PI, and that 3 out of 4 herds will not have a PI. In terms of the data flow from the ICBF system, you can see that the green arrows there are the inputs into the ICBF system, which are feeds from the CMMS or AIM system, the Animal Identification and Movement System, feeds from the laboratories, which are in turn receiving samples from the farmers and the vets. And then the outflows go back to Animal Health Ireland, to the farmer, and to the marts. And in terms of the specifics then of what ICBF delivers for AHI, they have a system which allows the receipt of standardised laboratory test data. They integrate that data with the AIM, the Animal Identification and Movement System, which is real time. So at any day of the year, we know where an animal is located in the national herd. They are responsible for the issuing of text messages to all participating herd owners. And in the case of those that have positive, inconclusive or no tissue results, there's also a letter that goes out to the herd owner. Again, that's automatically generated by the ICBF database. I already mentioned that the data is also exported to the marts via the AHCS, the Animal Health System of the Department of Agriculture, for display at mart premises. There are weekly updates to the implementation group, which is the group that's charged with the delivery of the programme, and these updates are essential in terms of allowing us to refine the communications and the programme design as we move towards the compulsory phase in 1st of January. There's the facility there because of the link to the animal movement system. ICBF is also able to provide us with forward and backward tracing. So where we identify a PI, we then go after the antecedents and the descendants of that animal. In other words, the mothers and grandmothers and the daughters, sons and grandsons of those animals. We can identify the herds in which they're located, and those farmers in turn then are notified of the presence of those animals in their herd. Currently, we're undertaking a detailed programme evaluation at the halfway point of the voluntary programme, and again, ICBF is generating the data that will drive that process. And we're also currently designing individual herd reports that will go back to all of the participating farmers in the voluntary phase, which will really be a scorecard to tell them how well they've participated in the initial phase of the programme and whether we will be able to recognise their participation in the first voluntary year as one of the 3 years in which they will have to undertake intensive tag testing. And then in development currently, but shortly to be finalised, will be the ability to produce test lists for vets who go out to do tests for BVD. So when I mentioned that we would be moving from a phase of intensive tag testing to one of monitoring, these test lists will play an increasingly important role in targeting, for example, the young stock that would need to be examined using serum tests. Okay, then finally, a couple of reflections, picking up on some of the themes there and coming back to my comments at the top of this. Really, these are reflections in relation to the specifics of the development of the BVD programme, and also more generally the relationship between Animal Health Ireland and ICBF. First of all, in taking a decision to partner with ICBF, as we did approximately 2 years ago in the development of databases, we were extremely conscious that ICBF has a very extensive database, which currently covers 90% of the breeding animals in the national herd. We're also very conscious that they have a proven track record. They've been around for a number of years. They're well trusted by the industry in terms of data management. They've shown themselves over the course of the 2 years that we've been involved with them to be very flexible and adaptive. So had we written a specification with a commercial company 2 years ago, I shudder to think what that would now cost us, because every revisiting of that specification would have cost Animal Health Ireland additional money, whereas ICBF has shown itself to be extremely adaptive, and the fact that they are a stakeholder within Animal Health Ireland has meant that that hasn't had a cost impact, or hasn't had the same level of cost impact as it would have if we were dealing with a commercial supplier. So that's the point there in relation to the cost effectiveness. So government puts money into Animal Health Ireland, not huge sums in the scheme of things, about €500,000 per annum. I don't know exactly what the figure is in relation to ICBF, but again, the money is not huge. So I would argue that this is a very cost-effective use of limited government resources, and also a very effective use of industry resources. So I think what we're seeing here is that there has been a convergence of science, in that veterinary science and the science of genetics, particularly where it intersects with the area of the genetic resistance to disease, are converging over time. And there's an increasing understanding of these issues of genetic resistance to disease. There's also a convergence in terms of technology. So by virtue of the fact that we are capturing tissue samples as part of a diagnostic test for BVD, provides a huge resource, potential resource, for genomic analysis or for genetic analysis, potentially over the entire national calf crop. And then maybe more philosophically, but I think also importantly, the two organisations share very similar objectives. We're both created to improve profitability, sustainability, the competitiveness of the Irish livestock sector. And we're both industry good organisations. So we are not responsive to a commercial agenda. We are operating to an agenda that hopefully meets the needs of the industry as a whole. And Chairman, I'll finish on that point. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Joe.